I think that TFFF is an initiative that has great potential because it is put forward and supported by tropical rainforest countries. It is not something a mechanism that has been defined by donors or by any experts. It is now pushed and promoted by the countries that harbor all this tropical forest. And this in itself, I think, is very impressive.
Welcome to the Mongabay newscast. I'm your co-host, Mike DiGirolamo, bringing you weekly conversations with experts, authors, scientists, and activists working on the front lines of conservation, shining a light on some of the most pressing issues facing our planet and holding people in power to account. This podcast is edited on Gadigal land. This week on the newscast, we speak with three people about the recent Tropical Forest Forever Facility, or TFFF, a funding mechanism to give billions of dollars to tropical forested nations that protect their forests against a baseline. As reported on by Mongabay, the TFFF is a novel forest fund that essentially functions as an investment portfolio and pays tropical forested nations the money that investment countries make above their agreed-upon return of 5.5% over 20 years. You'll first hear from Mongabay contributor Justin Catanoso, who was present at COP16 in Cali, Colombia, and reported on this fund. COP16 is the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and delegates from 177 nations attended this conference. It's a separate COP than the one that took place in Azerbaijan this year, which was COP29, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change. Then you'll hear from Charlotte Streck, the co-founder and director of Climate Focus, an international advisory company, and then from Frédéric Hache, a lecturer in sustainable finance from Sciences Po in Paris. These three guests examine critical questions about the TFFF, what it does and doesn't do. The fund, which the Brazilian government initially proposed at COP28 in Dubai, is expected to launch in 2025 at COP30 in Belém. As you'll hear from our guest today, there is some mixture of optimism and skepticism surrounding the fund, but there is a definitive agreement that COP16 dropped the ball on the necessary level of forest finance to help halt and reverse biodiversity loss, and that wealthy nations are not stepping up to the plate to donate money to offset the destruction that they're responsible for. Other funding mechanisms, such as the Green Climate Fund or REDD+, have underperformed. And while the TFFF shows some promise, it is not a substitute for environmental regulation, and ultimately, ending and redirecting harmful subsidies needs to happen. First, I spoke with Justin about how the fund works. Justin, welcome back to the Mongabay newscast. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Mike. I am glad to be back.
So you attended COP16 in Colombia, and at this conference, something was announced called the Tropical Forest Forever Facility. What is the Tropical Forest Forever Facility? What does it do exactly? And how does it differ from previous funding commitments or forest protection mechanisms?
So this is a finance mechanism. It's a finance strategy that, best I can tell in my covering of UN climate summits over the last 10 years, is that it is really new and it's really novel in the climate world, in the biodiversity world, but not in the investment world. This is a lot like how banks work, how they lend money, how they charge interest, how they return money to investors based on a fixed amount of interest. So TFFF, as it's called, will be an investment fund. They being the Brazilian government, which is the originator of this mechanism. They announced it last year at COP28 in Dubai, is essentially looking at 6 wealthy nations, which are the US, Norway, Germany, France, Great Britain, and the United Arab Emirates, to invest, not donate, $25 billion in early 2025. That is being seen as a kind of seed capital that will attract another $100 billion from international financial institutions like the World Bank or the International Monetary Fund, perhaps big philanthropies like the Gates Foundation or the Bezos World Fund, or even rich billionaires that want in on this. So they want to get up to $125 billion. That money is going to be invested in a portfolio of carefully selected / aggressive investment vehicles that they want to return 5.5% on average over 20 years, 5.5% return. Now they believe that 5.5% return will go back to the investors every year. There will be money above that in interest that will be raised and captured to the amount of about $4 billion a year. And that's what will be on hand to distribute to about 70 tropical countries to incentivize them to keep their intact tropical forest standing rather than cut for agriculture, extraction, or any other kind of deforestation like timbering.
So what makes the TFFF different?
Mike, it's not donations, it's an investment. Like, this is how the banking world works. This is what finance responds to. These 6 nations and the philanthropies and the international banks are investing, not donating. They are going to be getting a return on that money. They're only putting that money up once. It's going to be a sustainable fund if it is invested in a way that produces, on average, over 20 years, 5.5% return, which is easily done, by the way. If you go back and look at markets over the last 20 years going back, we're well over 5.5% up in terms of what happens in the market. This is a very doable fund with a lot less risk than donating money that you're not really sure is going to the right places or is actually going to be used for the purposes that it's going to be used for. There are other governance aspects of this fund in terms of monitoring to make sure that the forests are intact for the money that these tropical countries get. So it's really smart. And as it was described to me in Colombia, like nothing else out there. So there's a good bit of genuine, and I think like well-meaning optimism around this fund working where other donations year after year just don't stand a chance.
So Justin, is this fund going to add debt to these countries that already have debt? Thanks for tuning in to listen to the first few minutes of this podcast. To hear the full conversation, find the Mongabay newscast wherever you get your podcasts from and click subscribe. You can also get each new episode straight to your inbox by subscribing to Mongabay's weekly newsletter at mongabay.com. And if you really want to support us, you can donate to our Patreon at patreon.com/Mongabay. Thanks for listening.